Welcome to Let's Talk About It Sunday, an extension of KELA's weekday local talk show featuring a variety of subjects of local interest. This program was pre-recorded, so we're unable to take live calls on today's show. And now, let's talk about it.
Welcome to Let's Talk About It. I'm your host, Peter Abbarno, here on AM 1470 KELA and 104.3 KMNT. The show today, it's interesting because according to the Bureau of Economic Analysis, the U.S. digital economy accounted for 10.2% of the U.S. gross domestic product, $3.3 trillion in 2020. That year, the digital economy accounted for 7.8 million jobs. With me today on Let's Talk About It is the American Edge Project CEO, Doug Kelly, to discuss what is AEP, what do they want you to know about the importance of preserving technological innovation here in America, especially amongst small businesses and innovators. We're going to talk about job creation. We're talking about innovation. We'll talk about national security. Really great show. So stay tuned and listen to AM 1470 throughout this entire show. And with us today, let's talk to Doug Kelly, CEO of American Edge Project. Hi, Doug. How are you today?
Hey, Peter. Thanks for having me. I'm doing great today.
Yeah, so American Edge Project, some folks might not know what that is. So tell us a little bit about, what is American Edge Project?
Sure. American Edge Project, we're a coalition of roughly 24 different organizations all across the country. They represent small businesses. They represent technology entities. They represent women organizations, veteran organizations, and our mission is very singular. We want to make sure the American people and lawmakers know about the critical role that technology innovation plays in America's success. Because technology isn't just another sector of the economy, Peter. It's the very backbone of our national security, of our economic prosperity, and frankly, the advancement of American values, both at home and abroad. And so we realize, technology is this giant power strip that we plug everything into, and we got to make sure that America continues to lead the world in technology because so much is at stake on it.
And Doug, you talk about technology, and that's such a broad term. So for me, I'm thinking cell phones, computer, but I would imagine you're also talking about just the basics of like platforms like TikTok and Facebook and anything else you use on that computer or cell phone.
Yeah, I mean, it's a really broad category, right? So one of the things that we focus on is kind of the strategic technologies of the future, right? So it's certainly all of the big platforms we talk about, from e-commerce to social media, but it's also artificial intelligence. It's microchips. It's biotechnology. It's 5 and 6G. It's all of the things that are cybersecurity. It's all of those things that are essential to running this giant, sprawling digital economy that we have. When you think about every single device that you have in your house is pretty much hooked up to the internet in some way. Even refrigerators and stoves are getting smarter and connecting to the internet.
They are, and I just bought a new refrigerator that has an app that'll let me know if the door's open when I'm not home or something. I mean, it's really amazing how everything is now interconnected, and it's a little scary for a lot of people.
Yeah, it is, and that's one of the reasons. It's funny we're having this discussion today because in October it's National Cybersecurity Month, right? And cybersecurity is it's the issue of the decade because our biggest opponent when it comes to technological leadership is China. China's goal overall is to be the number one global superpower by 2049. And they understand that technology is the way that they're going to do that. So they have a 3-part plan to kind of take the leadership from the U.S. in technology. The first is they're spending literally trillions of dollars to build their own capabilities, microchip manufacturing, advanced technologies. The second thing they're doing is what they can't build, they're stealing from the U.S. They have the world's largest hacking effort by far, and each year the U.S. loses about $500 billion in technology to theft by China. That's why, cybersecurity is so important. And the third part of their plan is very simple. They want to make the world more dependent on their technology because then they can have economic and political and geopolitical leverage, right? They can turn things off, they can turn things on, and it gives them a sense of control that we just can't hand over to them. So it's a race between America and China, and in this next decade, that's going to decide who the winner's going to be.
And that's really interesting, that 3-point kind of plan that China is developing. So how does AEP help address that first one in terms of the trillions of dollars being invested in microchip creation and investment in their infrastructure for technology?
Yeah, well, every country wants to build its own capabilities. But one of the things that we need to make sure we do as America is make sure that we are not helping China develop the advanced technologies of the future. So you saw President Trump, to his credit, rightly raised the issue of China and its unfair trading practices, but especially its threat of technology. President Biden carried through on a lot of those things, and he's recently had some additional actions that are restricting any type of microchip support for China. So, because at the end of the day, microchips are the thing that makes everything go. And so we want to let lawmakers know that there's certain strategic technologies that we can't let China have, that we need to stop from going over there. And those technologies we can't have made overseas. They have to be home shored and built here, or they have to be built in a really trusted allied country. Because as we saw during the pandemic, when the supply chain challenges hit, we had automobiles just sitting in parking lots that couldn't be sold because they missed 3 or 4 microchips, most of which were being made over in Asia. And Taiwan is just 100 miles away from China, and they make, about 70% of the world's advanced microchips. And so we want Congress to pass laws that help create more jobs here and more strategic technologies in America.
Well, if you're just tuning in to Let's Talk About It with your host, Peter Abbarno, my special guest today is CEO of the American Edge Project, Doug Kelly. Doug, I had just read that 9 out of the top 20 technology companies are now based in China rather than the U.S. And you're talking about national security and trying to keep things here. What policies, whether federal or state, is AEP supporting that might help keep those companies or bring them back here so that we don't have to worry about that supply chain interruption?
Yeah, I mean, look, we've written a lot of different studies on this, and people can find them at our website at AmericanEdgeProject.org. But there's a couple of things that we can do to start with. First, you kind of look at Coach Vince Lombardi, right? I'm an old guy here, right? So he was one of my favorite coaches. And the way you win a game is you have a good offense, a strong defense, and you avoid self-inflicted errors. So I'll start on the offense side. The number one thing that lawmakers do to make sure that America is number one in technology innovation is to make sure that our country has a set of laws that are helping accelerate innovation and helping strengthen and boost the private sector. We're number one in the world in technology, and we're for a long time because we have this innovation ecosystem of bringing new ideas with capital, with business support, with other investors that kind of move an idea from an innovative idea from a piece of paper to the market really quickly. And we allow companies to buy other companies, to merge, to acquire, to take a great idea and move it quickly to scale. Very few other countries have that type of robust private sector like America does. And that has always been our secret sauce, and it is our competitive advantage against China. They really struggle to recreate that there. So policymakers need to do things that say, hey, what can we do here to accelerate innovation? And then the second part is, what can we do to make sure that we are building the strategic technologies of the future here in America? And one great example was when Congress and the president recently passed the CHIPS plus manufacturing of chips bill here in America. It's roughly a $50 billion bill. It says, hey, all of these microchip manufacturing facilities that have been overseas, we want to build some right here in the USA. And in my community in Columbus, Ohio, we just landed the new microchip plant for Intel. It's going to be a $20 billion, with a B, billion-dollar investment over the next 5 years. It potentially could grow to $100 billion And that would be the largest manufacturing facility for microchips in the entire world. And that would be roughly 10 years from now. That's going to fundamentally transform Central Ohio's economy, and move us from, what used to be a manufacturing economy and is now a lot of based on healthcare and education. It's going to move us into like a Silicon heartland model of that technology is going to drive a lot of the economy here.
Well, and Doug, you and I talked a little bit before the show. You're from Michigan originally. And in your bio, it talks a little bit about losing manufacturing jobs in Michigan. And I told you I grew up in Buffalo, a brownfield, lost a lot of, Bethlehem Steel left, a lot of the manufacturing left. It seems our economy needs to somehow evolve in one way or the other, whether it's bringing manufacturing jobs to a certain point back, or to also transition into what you're talking about with microchips and bringing things that traditionally are thought of to be produced in China back here, like chips. Is that something that AEP is really supporting? Yeah,
absolutely. When you think about just the personal pain point, right? When I was growing up in high school in the 80s, you didn't have to go to college. You could go work in any of one of the 40 factories that were in Lenawee County, Michigan, where I grew up. You could have a great middle-class living. You could send your kids to college and have a great retirement. Well, after Congress passed some short-sighted laws that really advantaged China, we lost a lot of that manufacturing base. And in fact, my home county lost 43% of its manufacturing jobs. About the only place that was hit harder was Buffalo.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah.
And so we've seen this movie before when policymakers make short-term decisions that aren't necessarily in the strategic long-term interest of the country. And with tech being even a larger presence and larger importance than manufacturing, we can't make that same mistake again, because we know how that movie turned out. We're very pro building things here that are of advanced technologies. And I'll be honest with you, a lot of the communities in the Midwest, like Buffalo or Ohio, they have excess manufacturing capacity. They know how to build things. In Washington State, technology is such an amazing force for your economy. I mean, I think at the start of the show you said tech is 10% of the nation's economy. In Washington State, it's 22%
right.
of the overall economic impact. I mean, 300,000 jobs in tech, $127 billion in total economic impact. You guys have been the model for America in many, many ways of how do you take technology and leverage it for great community gain.
You are listening to Let's Talk About It Sunday, an extension of KELA's weekday local talk show. Stay tuned. Let's Talk About It Sunday edition will return in a moment.
Okay, and now back to business.
Listen on the air and online.
KELA.
Let's talk about it. Good morning. You're listening to Let's Talk About It Sunday, an extension of KELA's weekday local talk show. This program was pre-recorded, so no live phone calls on today's show.
If you're just tuning in to Let's Talk About It on AM 1470 KELA or 104.3 KMNT, my special guest this morning, the CEO of the American Edge Project, Doug Kelly. And Doug and I are talking a little bit about what AEP does. We're talking about innovation and technology and American manufacturing and really the transition of that. Doug, you just talked about earlier in the show about data centers. Data centers also require a lot of energy, and we're kind of coming into our own as a country into an energy revolution as well to be able to support this transition. What are your thoughts on that as well?
Yeah, I mean, these data centers are really phenomenal things. First of all, they create a lot of high-tech jobs overall. But these things are enormous power users. They have lots of piping. They need lots of water. And so there's a lot of different blue-collar jobs that are created for plumbers and pipe fitters and sheet metal workers and all the gamut of the trades, not only just from building them to start with, but then, maintaining them going forward. And that creates a lot of high-paying jobs that don't require a college degree, that really benefit a community at all different income levels and all different socioeconomic strata. And so, every state has a stake in trying to land one of these data centers because, I think Google, Amazon, Meta, and Intel all now have data centers right here in Central Ohio. And every single state is really trying to land these because they create really good jobs. And so there's a real advantage here if we build it and have it in America, both from a strategic standpoint, but then also from a job standpoint as well.
Well, and Doug, one of the second points you talked about in terms of this strategy of China after, the investment into trillions of dollars into the infrastructure and the building of microchips is the fact that they're stealing proprietary data, through hacking, and that the United States loses, I think you said, did you say $500 billion?
Yeah,
I mean, it's
a head scratcher.
It really, it is. And is that in like lost productivity? What's that? I mean, and how do you stop that? Because if you're even if you're building things here, obviously there's going to be still the incentive of places like China to come in and try to steal it.
Yeah. And look, they're really good. I mean, their cyber core hacking team is 100,000 people, right? The number of hackers that they have outnumber the FBI cyber team by a factor of 50 to 1. And their hacking team is bigger than all other countries' efforts combined. So it's a strategy of theirs, right? It's not a one-off. It is a core of their strategy. Let's accelerate our growth in China by stealing other countries' technology. So when I talked about we have to have a good offense of like building technologies here and passing smart laws, on the good defense side, number one is we have to have great cybersecurity. And yeah, we do lose a lot each year. But one of the things you're seeing too is you don't get a story about, hey, we stopped 85,000 cyber attacks in a single day, right? That doesn't make the news, right? But America's leading tech companies are some of the biggest investors in cybersecurity, or some of the biggest trainers of cybersecurity experts, and they're spending literally tens of billions of dollars on this to make sure that our country's data, customer data is safe, and all the different things that we need to do to slow down China. The second part of what we have to do on a good defense to slow down China's ambition is to deprive that country of certain strategic tools that it needs for its technological growth. So a couple areas there, right? Huawei is one of their big telecommunication companies. They build chips that are going to rural telecommunication centers and rural internet providers all across the globe. Well, a lot of those chips, in effect, spy on the internet traffic. And so what we've had to do in America is we're ripping them out and replacing them with American chips or chips that are made by in our NATO ally countries, because we can't afford to have that type of spyware embedded into our critical infrastructure. And so making sure that we're making good decisions and stopping Huawei's ability to get into America, stopping our export of critical technologies to China, that's a really critical thing that our lawmakers have to keep their eye on. And I think they're doing a pretty good job. And I mean, lawmakers really understand this threat from China. But sometimes, we want to make sure they really understand that.
Well, and you read newspaper articles and you hear kind of the news where, one of our, military planes has chips from China, and you kind of wonder, how does that even happen? Yeah, you have to assume that they're spying in some way on those, and it's a little unnerving to think that a small telecommunication company, even in our community, might have chips that are spying on our internet traffic.
Yeah, it goes for everything, right? I mean, a large percent of the drones are made in China, right? Many of them report back to China. Just basic, as people film and video stuff with their drones, right? It goes back to Beijing. And so the challenge here is look, our beef is not with the Chinese people, right? They're a billion-plus hardworking entrepreneurial people. The threat from China comes from its communist leadership. I just want to be really clear about that, because China uses technology to censor, control, and surveil its population. That's their view of how do we use technology to maximize the state. Whereas the West and America's view of technology is how can we use technology to increase accessibility, to increase democracy, to increase freedom, to increase speech overall, because we want to use technology to empower people, not to control people. And at the end of the day, these are two very different visions for what the world should look like, and what role technology should play in it.
Right.
And
Or they'll just
exporting that.
Or they'll just send a balloon over.
Well, we're shooting them down pretty regularly now, aren't we?
I mean, as you're talking, the image in my head is, well, or you just send a balloon. Sorry to interrupt you.
No, it's fine. But even, it's funny if it weren't.
Yeah.
Right? Even with port cranes, right? Most of these big port cranes, and you guys have a ton of them in Washington State, right?
Yeah.
Most of the big port cranes are made in China. They come over here on large boats. Then they're operated by Chinese operators, and all of them have security systems to look out and see what trade is coming in, what cargo is coming in, where is it going, which ships are here, right? All of that reports back there. And so China has a very, very long-term view of how do we become the number one superpower, because they believe it's their destiny, they believe what they're, it's what they're here for. And
right.
So America is much more short-term focused. I mean, we just barely finished one presidential election. Now we're on to the next one, right? It's only what's in our face, right in front of our face, that we really focus on, where China has a much longer view. So we're urging lawmakers, hey, take a longer view of how do we make sure we beat China in the technology areas? How do we do things that check Russia and what they're trying to do in exporting digital authoritarianism? Let's take this longer view, because it has to be, it's not a partisan thing, right? It's not Democrats are doing great or Republicans are doing great. It's like, what do all of our elected officials at the state, local, and federal level, both parties, what do we have to do to make sure that America remains number one technology, because that is our wheelhouse and that is the driver of our success.
And if you're just tuning in to Let's Talk About It on AM 1470 KELA or 104.3 KMNT, I'm your host, Peter Abbarno, and my special guest today, the CEO of the American Edge Project, Doug Kelly. Doug, so let's talk a little bit about, we've got these points that, the strategy of China, looking at what maybe state legislatures or the federal government can do. Is some of it, antitrust? Is some of it anti-regulation? Is it trying to create incentives to compete, to try to create innovation? I mean, especially your comments regarding hacking, I really listened to that, because one of the points you made was that a lot of the cyber security is done privately because the companies are incentivized to protect their own intellectual property.
Mm-hmm.
So what's the best maybe motivation or process?
Well, the government can set really high standards for what do the protections have to look like on critical infrastructure? What are companies actually responsible for? So it can set a pretty high bar, and companies will raise and react to that bar. So I think that's one of the areas where it's going. When I talked about China's three-part plan, there's a kind of a third part of what we got to do, right? A good offense, a good defense, but we also have to avoid self-inflicted wounds, right? And you talked about kind of what lawmakers can do, but let's talk a little bit about what they shouldn't do. So lawmakers in both Europe and America are really focused on some short-term laws that can really damage America's leading tech innovators. Let's start with Europe. So the European Union, when you talked about that big list of technology companies, there's not a single European technology company in the top 10 or top 12 globally. And the reason for that is that Europe overregulates to a degree that doesn't really lead to innovation overall. So Europe just recently passed a thing called the Digital Markets Act. It's a great sounding name, but really what it is their goal is to take that act to target American tech companies, to slow them down with tough new regulations in Europe so that they can build up their domestic tech industry. But unfortunately, the only thing that Digital Markets Act is going to do is it's going to help China. So the way that works is Europe assigns, hey, big platform companies are called gatekeepers, and they have a set of services that have to be regulated. And if not, we'll have 10% of worldwide revenue fines. We can potentially strip them of certain business rights in this country. So when they first talked about this, Peter, they said, well, look, it'll probably be about 25 companies overall. There'll be a mix of European companies, American companies that are subject to these new regulations. Guess what? When it all came out, there were 6 companies that were listed as platform companies. 5 of them were American, 0 were European, and 1 was from China. Of the 22 services they said have to fall under these new regulations, 21 of the 22 services are American companies. So when you look at that, these guys are our allies here.
Right.
And they're doing things that for businesses in Europe, when they look at, okay, I've got to comply with these new things, if these compliance costs for American firms hit the estimated $50 billion that it's going to do, those costs are going to be passed on to businesses. Some businesses in Europe, about 16% in one survey, said they'll ship the Chinese technology just to save money. So Europe's own goal of building its own technology is going to actually shift more people to using Chinese technology, giving them the leverage that they seek. So that's a short-term, wrong way of looking at what we have to do for technology to help the West overall. Now, in America, certain lawmakers are in favor of restrictions on mergers and acquisitions. They're in favor of antitrust legislation. All of those things help undermine America's innovation ecosystem. And what it'll do is really it'll hurt small businesses who rely on these platforms. It'll hurt investors who are trying to move capital in. It'll hurt job creators who are kind of serial entrepreneurs in creating new different small businesses and startups. And so at the end of the day, we need to make sure that we're passing laws that accelerate innovation, check China, but also don't shoot us in the foot at the same time.
Well, and Doug, it sounds like we're talking about finding that fine balance, finding that balance between, the making sure regulations don't go too far, making sure we have some oversight so people feel comfortable, but we've got to make sure that small businesses have the platforms and that we continue to innovate technology and stay ahead, or at least try to catch up with China right now.
Yeah, and I think you do this a lot in your day job, right? You try and balance, okay, what is the right way that we can go about putting in essential protections, but not going so far that we're going to thwart business development or job creation or our ability to innovate overall. And sometimes you have to wait for a technology to emerge before you really know what it is. So artificial intelligence is a great example. I'm old enough that I was born and had a job before the internet was created. And so once this internet came along, all of us were like, what is this thing? This is kind of cool, but I'm not sure it's going to last. Well, guess what? That thing transformed the entire globe and how we do business and how we operate. Every single expert says that the impact of artificial intelligence is going to be significantly larger than what the internet was. But in many ways, AI is just getting started, right? It was just kind of launched out there to the public domain. It's been around for a while, but it was launched out in the public domain only within the last year. So we don't even know what its potential can be. One study said that AI is and it estimated to generate $15 trillion, Peter, $15 trillion in economic value by 2030. So if America is the leader in artificial intelligence, we're going to capture that value. We're going to create more jobs. We're going to be able to sell to other countries. But if we pass laws that are really restrictive on AI can't do this and government saying how AI can work and what it can and what it can't do and what companies can do with it, goodness gracious, that is going to hand AI leadership to China. And I can assure you China's not going to use AI globally for good.
No, they'll take advantage of it and they'll use it against us.
Yeah, and they're going to use it to export their same model of digital authoritarianism, except on steroids, in a way that we can barely imagine. And so, it matters which country builds the future. It matters which set of values are embedded in the globe's technology. And we are well positioned to win this race. But that's why the American Edge Project was created, right? We need to make sure that lawmakers understand what's at stake. We want to make sure that every single man, woman, and child understand what's at stake here. and that they take the right actions to help us succeed as a country in making sure that we are, for decades to come, the global technology leader.
Well, and I think you made a very strong point about which value system you want spread across the globe and who you want in control of it, and most certainly from my chair, it's the American value. And Doug, we're running out of time, and boy, we could have a whole nother show just on the AI thing. But Doug, I appreciate you joining the show. Doug Kelly, CEO of the American Edge Project. Doug, if people want to learn more about the American Edge Project, where can they go?
They can come to our website, the AmericanEdgeProject.org. And I just urge your audience to pick up the phone and call their member Congress and senators and say, hey, stand up for American technology and don't hand our edge to China. They'll listen. It's really important your audience does that.
Well, I appreciate it, Doug. Thank you very much for calling in and sharing all your thoughts.
Hey, Peter, thanks so much. Have a great day.
Yeah, you too. That was Doug Kelly, CEO of the American Edge Project. I'm Peter Abbarno, your host of Let's Talk About It on AM 1470 KELA and 104.3 KMNT. Thank you for joining us.